A team at Microsoft Research discovered that they can predict an episode of disordered eating simply based on people's web search history. And they can see these changes in the patterns that indicate that an episode of disordered eating is about to happen. Now, this is both powerful because it gives a tool for people to think about how they can care for themselves and their loved ones if they're trying to manage a condition. On the other hand, it's not something we want to empower advertisers with. When people can make inferences about health indicators, we need to start treating that data with the sensitivity as if it's health data, whether or not it generates from web searches or from our smartphones.
Yeah, that is such a fascinating observation. This conversation is going to go in a couple of directions, but on this question of inferences, you're absolutely right. You can make such powerful inferences from what could be quite benign or trivial information. I mean, my previous company, which was acquired a few years ago, we were early on in building trust and reputation and authenticity metrics on Twitter. But it became quite clear that you could predict all sorts of personal and personality characteristics from that data as well. And also by using certain sort of behavioral attributes like homophily, which is birds of a feather flocking together, you could make predictions about people even if you didn't have any data about them because you had the predictions about all the people around them. And so there is this challenge about what can you infer from across perhaps a number of different inference steps about somebody. And I think one of your researchers at the OII has published on this idea of what reasonable inferences should be allowed to be made from data, because it seems to be something that existing privacy rules don't worry about too much.
One of the phrases from legal scholarship that I've really found very useful in this is predictive privacy harms from Kate Crawford and Jason Schultz, and they've thought about if we can narrow a person down to 80% likelihood we have exactly Azeem Azhar, right? Mm-hmm. Then is it a legal harm is it a privacy disclosure if we're pretty sure we have exactly this individual?
Right.
I think people are starting to realize in the wake of the data scandals around elections and now with increased news coverage of a smart home and IoT devices and geolocation data that there is a kind of data double, as another author has called it, a data double that exists of them, and we can't see that double. We can't audit it. We can't see if it's actually saying accurate or fair things about us. We can't see how that data double is being used in decisions about our credit, about our in the United States, about our health insurance, about our employment, and that feels like it's out of our control.
And it seems like data doubles are with us to stay. It's almost impossible to imagine a world where we aren't going to interact in ways that are going to result in there being a data footprint. And on top of that, I think once you have that data, the ability for the technical systems, the algorithms, the maths, to then create some kind of phenotype or fingerprint or segmentation of you are so commonplace that sort of segmentation is going to happen very, very rapidly and very, very cheaply, soon to be done for free. And so I suppose the argument is data doubles can be extremely useful. They're also going to be inevitable, and turning them into microsegments is going to become free or very commonplace. So we need to have much more explicitly defined rights frameworks, privileges, and remedies available than are currently have been made available.
One of the authors who's really inspired me on this is an anthropologist, Bill Maher, who talks about data as having kinship rights. and so rather than think about just my data, right, it has two parents. Or in the case of data doubles, right, multiple parents. We have many parents, right? So we have the devices and the technology companies who have created, stored, circulate this information, but we also have my rights, and bringing in a notion of kinship rights suggests that you can't give up your data so easily, that because it comes from you, because you've created this thing, you have a set of rights and responsibilities that continue in perpetuity, that those rights are not easily voided. And that brings us to a very different kind of framework for thinking through how a future with data that empowers us, that gives us information, that helps us, learn great things both about ourselves and accomplish, fantastic things, is very different from a framework that says, okay, strap this cheap device on, please, and we're going to now know everything about you.
It brings to mind something that you retweeted from Frank Pasquale, which was he quoted an article that says, "Will schools crunch my prenatal health data back to my toddler into the appropriate preschool classroom? It seems only a matter of time before biological data is also enlisted into multi-generational systems of discipline."
I think we have to be really careful when we're raising these. I mean, we've so developed a belief that more data is always better, that we haven't even begun to think about what some of the long-term consequences are. We haven't thought about the environmental consequences of storage and maintenance. We haven't thought about the consequences of repair. And then because I think about organizations and industries, we really haven't thought about how we do long-term management of a data double, a data ecosystem. So, anybody who's worked with large scale data knows that something gets lost when you move data from one context to another, when you try to use data that's been collected in one realm and try to make inferences or use in another. And usually we understand those challenges, like what is lost. But too often, I think we're creating these notions that data are simply interchangeable. The thing that gives people pause is when they feel like they're not being fully brought into the kinds of conversations and they're not made fully aware of the kinds of data that are being collected and what's being done with that data. So the recent reporting around geolocation data and how fine-grained it is, and that it is gathering data about children, that we're gathering very sensitive data about where people live, where they work, where they visit, that begins to feel much more like surveillance than it does contributing to larger social good.
Just a reminder that support for Exponential View comes from Spotify. Now you can listen to your favorite music and podcasts in one spot with Spotify's new killer feature, the Podcast Hub. Now back to our conversation. And on that question of larger social good, in some countries when we look at organ donation, there's a regime of presumed consent, which is that if you sort of unfortunately die but still have good organs, the state can or the medical services can take those organs and put them on into the transplant list pool. Some people, I'm one of them, has argued that we should also think about having a presumed consent to share on certain classes of data that we generate about ourselves. Do you think that's a viable idea? Because that might be one way of getting access to the social good and demonstrating the benefits more broadly.
Potentially, but let me raise a risk that I see to that kind of data donation model from a sociological point of view. So, for example, I did 23andMe, direct-to-consumer genetics testing, along with one of my graduate research assistants. And, that data is not just mine, right? It's my genetic data is also data about my parents, and it's data about my children. And so here are, in a very sort of short way, here are people that I have implicated. And we're already starting to see some of the thorny legal questions. Can my genetic data implicate me in a crime? Can my genetic data be used to implicate a family member in a crime? And those are questions that we as a society haven't figured out yet. So while I think, we need to be cautious, we need to make sure that we're setting up these data donation regimes in ways that ensure that people won't be harmed from their own altruism.